this bunch here are our stabilisers who you've met before. So they are all in calf to Goose, who's in here somewhere.
Where is he?
And they will start calving at the beginning of January to have their second calf. So if they've had one calf and they're about to have their second.
And they're being fed what?
So that's grass seed straw, so that's what comes out the back of the combine when we harvest grass seed. And they also have a barley-based ration which is grown on the farm to give them a bit more energy and minerals.
So, pasture fed?
Well, you've seen the state of our fields outside. Our cattle have to come in the winter time. We produce the grass seed straw, which is a really good byproduct, but I would totally confess that it's not as good as good quality hay, so we have to buffer feed a little bit of cereals to give them enough energy.
But the purist would say that cattle don't naturally eat barley, therefore you're doing something that isn't quite right.
I think we're maximising our opportunities here, and they're having a total of 4 pounds a day, so that's about 1.5 kilos of barley meal.
Yeah.
It's also an excellent way of making sure each of them get the right amount of minerals. So in my view, it's very good. We grow the barley on the farm, we can make sure they have the right amount of minerals, and we use our byproduct of growing grass seed, which is highly efficient.
So they're pasture fed from what, April to November?
So they go out April to November to weather will
Yeah.
let them, and then the grass seed straw arguably is pasture as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a bad compromise, and I'm very happy with it.
Now, cows farting. Well, first of all, are you using bovine?
We're not using bovine, although it's a fascinating subject. All talk about cows' digestion and so on, because there's been various bits of work done to suggest that we don't know very much about it. In our case, I am absolutely convinced that by using dry feed, in our case the grass seed straw, they burp and fart less.
What, instead of silage?
Instead of silage. They're much drier underfoot in the yard, so that they're not making such a mess. And my view is that they're happy. It's interesting though that there's been work done to suggest that genetically you can have 100% variation in methane production of effectively the same bred cow.
And
that's just a genetic. Well, there's two main factors. One is genetics, and the other is its first month of life and how much colostrum it had. So if it had a good start with its mother's colostrum, on the whole, their gut works better, and that's hardwired for life.
Phil, why are you humouring these people talking about cow farts? That's not really the problem, is it? So a few cows farting in our yard compared to 1 billion cars, overpopulation, flying around the world, Bill Gates on his trips off.
So there are several things that everyone needs to consider with cows farting and carbon and greenhouse gases. So the first thing is that you can't create or destroy anything. So all the carbon that any cow excretes, it has eaten. It can't
carbon or methane or?
Well, carbon is in methane, it's also in carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Now, I'll get to the point of methane being different, but basically from the carbon element, everything they excrete, they have eaten. And that includes the fact that they're producing meat as well, so that they've laid down some carbon in the meat that they produce, or the milk that they give their calves to produce meat, etc., etc. Now, methane is much more damaging as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But you should know that 40% of the methane that is emitted to the atmosphere comes from leaks from the oil and gas industry worldwide. And you can see it from satellites, so you know who's leaking it. The rest of it comes from all sorts of sources: humans, human activity, and ruminant animals. The thing with ruminant animals, and notably animals that are grazed on grass, is the only mitigation for methane in the atmosphere are the hydroxide ions that come from the water transpired through grazed grass. So what that means is that if you don't have those hydroxide ions because you haven't got any grazed grass, because you haven't got any cattle, then none of the methane gets washed out of the atmosphere. It stays there a relatively short time because of these hydroxide ions. So I would personally say that cattle are part of the solution. They are cycling carbon in a positive fashion, and they contribute very positively to the problems that we as humans create. Feedlots feeding only cereals are a little bit difficult because there's very little mitigation for methane because there's no grazed grass involved. Mown grass works to some extent as well, but other crops such as maize and cereals don't produce these hydroxide ions in the transpired water. So it is the grazed grass that is important mitigation for the methane. And the only things that can graze grass fairly obviously are ruminant animals in general. There are horses and one or two other things, but cattle and sheep are by far the biggest consumers of grazed grass.
And there are no feedlots in the UK?
There are virtually no feedlots in the UK. There are a few animals that are fattened on cereals, bulls namely, because they have to go to the abattoir at a very young age, so less than 14 or 15 months old, so that they will have a short period of time on solely cereals. But on the whole, there are no feedlots in the UK.
So Phil, it's fair to say it's not the cow, it's the how.
I would think that would sum it up fairly well.
Now, the thing I want to ask you about is with the stabilizers, what about the meat quality? Because one of these fine beasts, not these, but their offspring, we are going to kill and cut for sale.
Yeah, absolutely. So stabilizers are one of very few breeds who are genetically analyzed for a number of traits, one of which is eating quality of the meat. And so we're not just talking about breeding values or that cow produced that calf. You're looking at the actual analysis of the DNA and saying that animal will do that because the DNA tells me it will do that, which is several steps ahead. So that all these cattle are rated, and I would have to say that I can't afford to have the very highest rated ones, but they are bred for the eating quality, amongst other traits, of the meat that they produce. And so we know that'll happen because of their genetics. Don't we, Goose?
Isn't he lovely? Isn't he lovely? Oh, he's a good boy. Yeah, he is. So, there's going to be good fat content in it. There's going to be good.
It's done on taste testing. There's a little bit of marbling. It's the ability to actually fatten them without them running ridiculously to fat, but you want fat, but not too much or not too little. So it's really what gives the eating quality on the plate. But the other sort of traits, so some of the critical things about beef cattle, suckler cows, you don't want a very big cow because otherwise you're feeding a big cow to only produce one calf. You want it to calve easily, so you want a small calf that gets up and grows rapidly, so it's got good vigor and high growth rates from a reasonably small starting point. And so these, arguably, you could in theory be outperformed by your Belgian Blue or your Continental Cross.
Your double muscle.
But you might have had to go to a lot more trouble to get there. And these cattle are also much easier to fatten off grass in a rather more gentle way. The Continentals, you have to use cereals to get them to finish, otherwise you can't get them fat enough before they finish. These you can.
Okay, so it's not the cow, it's the how, and we'll be back. So Phil, the cattle are inside, and this system is called deep litter, isn't it?
That's right. So we've talked about farmyard manure before. This is farmyard manure in the making. So from our point of view, we litter the cattle on barley straw that we've grown ourselves. And so what you're looking at is a mixture of muck, urine and barley straw. And the idea is that we keep adding clean straw and leaving the muck below it. So you just keep adding it up, and then halfway through the winter we will muck it out and start again.
And so you're adding Bokashi?
We are adding Bokashi, and right as we speak comes the Bokashi operative.
So what are you doing, Mom?
Just spreading some of the bran on the shed.
What for?
Keep the microbes sort of going, and then hopefully they'll multiply themselves on the bedding. So like these are Jew bedding, so I'll put some bran on and then stick a couple of bales in here to go on top, and then hopefully it'll become anaerobic.
Because of the pressure of the cow's feet?
Yeah. And then hopefully the muck will be nicer when we come to get it out of the shed, and it'll be more ready to spread.
So pre-composted, I suppose.
Yeah, because I guess when it comes out, it's usually like highly, like, you know, not very nice when it comes out. Whereas it's much nicer if it's been Bokashi already.
Nicer?
Nicer.
Well, yeah, it's like very
all
hot.
muck is nice,
I was
Monty.
going to say acidic, but that might not be accurate.
Well, what the Bokashi will do is that it will start the breakdown process prior to it being composted before it goes on the field.
Right.
And so Bokashi, which is fermented sugar, has lots of benefits, but if we can get a secondary fermentation going in the muck underneath, then that will make the muck easier to get out of the shed because it's partly broken down, and it will make it much quicker to compost when we put it in the muck heap.
Will it though mean that your straw doesn't last as well?
It shouldn't make any difference to that, in as much that you've still got the moisture and the manure there, but you're just pre-composting it, you're starting to ferment it in the cattle yard. The other thing is that there are also known benefits in having Bokashi, health benefits to the cattle,
Yeah.
in having Bokashi in the straw underneath it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder to relate the two, but what we do know is that if you have cattle on too deep a muck, which gets too warm, you tend to promote infections.
Yeah.
And so we think that Bokashi is probably helping in that department.
It definitely helps with hens.
Well, with these cattle, the cows themselves are not really at risk from infections. But what are at risk from infections are the calves when they're newly born. And so from that point of view, it's those calves that we're looking to keep as healthy as possible, notably in terms of pneumonia and scab. To be fair, we have very low incidence of both, but it's nice to try and keep it that way and enhance that.
So should we go and look at the result of some Bokashi composting?
We'll leave Mom to spread this bag in a minute. That one's that side. Yeah. And if I leave that there, you can do that while we go and have a look at this heap of compost.
And so, Phil, what have we got here?
So this is part of our ongoing experimentation with composting in general. So it might not be obvious to you, but what this was food waste from a school mixed about 50-50 with wood chip and then composted using a rocket composter.
But it was Bokashi before, wasn't it?
The food waste was Bokashi'd in this lot, the one round the corner wasn't. So what we've discovered is that if you Bokashi the food waste, you get a better composting action in the rocket composter straight after. Now we've got to be fairly careful with this material because this is quite high in nutrients, and you know if we put this on the farm neat, it's pretty strong stuff. So what we're thinking is that we will take our Bokashi cow muck and we will mix it with materials like this, and we will compost the result to produce a slightly more benign compost that is full of slow release nutrients that we can then spread on the field.
You bought a machine, haven't you?
I've got a windrow.
Woo!
It's only a little one, but I've got it.
And what does that do?
So that will allow us to mix different materials in the windrows, the rows of compost, and we're then using what's called thermophilic composting. So it'll heat up, and that's what completes the process. So although this has been through a rocket composter, it has to mature some more. It will still heat up, and actually this actually is probably stopped now, partly because of the sheer quantity of rain that's on it. But if we mix other materials with it, we'll get it to heat up again, and then we can analyse it for nutrients and mix it appropriately to fit the soil profile of the field that we want to put it on.
So this is the drill.
So this is probably the key piece of machinery to our transition into more regenerative farming. So if you come this way, it looks like a massive piece of machinery. In some ways it is, because it will drill a 6 metre wide swath at one go. But actually, if you look at how it works, all you're doing is each coulter, these are quite worn, so they probably shouldn't.
It's packed up at the moment, isn't it?
So it's packed up at the moment, so it folds out.
Yeah.
But these coulters are what are called knife coulters, so that you can see that by dragging that through the soil that way,
Yeah.
you're actually only moving a very small amount of soil. Now I would say they should come down to here, and you know there's quite a lot of, they're due for renewal, but you can see that you're moving only a small amount of soil.
Yeah.
Therefore you only need a small tractor to pull it, and therefore you're not disturbing the ground too much. And for us, we're planting this in, we mentioned earlier that we move about 2 inches of soil, so we've got a little bit of soil around these. As the soil becomes more friable, we need to move less soil, and ultimately these will move enough soil on their own. So things like the cover crop is direct drill, so that's not cultivated at all. This just drills it straight in.
Okay.
And then at the back, you have these covering harrows, which just flick the soil sideways to make sure that these slots are covered in. And then the packers, so these wheels all form a line all the way across the back.
Yeah.
And these treads match up with the rows, so that they pack the seed in, so you get seed to soil contact, and hopefully you get a good discharge.
So what is this called?
This is called an Amazon Cayenne drill, but it's basically a min-till drill.
And have you bought this to go regenerative farming? Or
At the point that we decided we were going to change what we did, the idea was to look in the nettles and sell all the various bits of machinery that we'd accumulated in order to try and plough and plant, and basically purchase this drill and the low disturbance subsoiler with the result. So we sent 3 lorry loads of machinery away and had 2 items back. But I have to say that most of the machinery we sent away had done quite a lot of work, and quite a lot of it we hadn't used for years, in as much that we kept accumulating things on the basis that, well, we might need that.
now I must mention this shed. We'll go outside, shall we, and look at it.
Nice
So
shed.
this is a brand new grain store, Phil.
Well,
How many tons does it hold?
all I can say, it would hold about 800 or so tons of wheat. It's designed for grass seed as well, and you can see the perforated floor here, so that allows us to blow air through the crop to condition and dry it.
Yeah.
And we can drive on it, obviously, so that we can move the crop around with the JCB or the loader and its bucket. We are somewhat indebted to our landlords, the Duchy of Cornwall, for this, because they have provided this as an upgrade of some of our existing grain facilities, and for that all I can say is thank you very much.